we have a lot of scientific work going on in a certain area, but at the same time, we have really sort of juicy and interesting problems and challenges, which would deserve a deeper exploration, right?
Oh, all over the place, everywhere. But we seek safety.
Okay.
And you can talk about a scientist and put it in terms of stereotypes of being open-minded in the search for the truth. I mean, this is fine from a romantic point of view, but not realistic from a day-to-day view, because I mean we need a simple way for our simple minds to try to reduce everything into a nice, simple system.
Yes.
And in fields, we call that a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
And so the textbook is, and I don't care what the field is, so we open up the textbook and we say, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, here's how the world works, and here's the chapter on frequency, and here's the chapter on amplitude, and here's the chapter on and we just keep going. And then we go, whew. But if you really delve deep, you go, oh my stars, there's too many things that don't make any sense when you look around and see the way the world works. And it really doesn't make sense. So what do you do if you're a working scientist? Well, you can walk around saying, I don't know. and you walk around just keep saying, I don't know, that doesn't make sense. And you become the naysayer who makes fun of your textbook. All textbooks you should make fun of. Because as long as you don't have the misunderstanding that anything in there is true, it's not true. It's stuff that is our reduction of the way the world works. And as we've said, we've reduced it in the 20th century to energy. And we can have energy and look at, I mean, Einstein's seriously cool. So you got energy equals matter. I mean, this guy was crazy, but pretty impressive. And look, we can turn a little bit of matter into a lot of energy. You know, isn't that cool? Let's bomb things, you know, or let's generate a whole lot of energy from a little bit of matter, and it works. Well, what was left out is information, and we're going to start to transition to not just energy. I'm reasonably confident this is going to be the century of information. And now, if people reduce everything just to information and forget, you know, everything else, that's not it. That's not it. We got to build on it. But in terms of your question, what's in it for a scientist? Well, a scientist, if you started saying, I don't know, but there's not a lot of Einsteins. You know, this guy put it together in an astonishing way. I mean, literally, it was astonishing. It's not true. It's just astonishing. And then somebody else is going to come along and show where Einstein doesn't make any sense.
So what Einstein basically did is he didn't allow himself to be constrained by the given textbooks.
No.
So he was thinking out of the box, and he was prepared to basically rewrite at least some chapters of that sort of book in order to enhance mankind's understanding or theoretical model of how reality actually really works.
Completely, yeah. And he didn't fit the other stuff, and he kept wondering, and he kept wondering, and he kept wondering, and he kept questioning. I think that's a beautiful thing. And he wasn't a particularly good student, so he didn't have much he had to forget. But he asked beautiful questions.
And those questions, I think those are the questions, or similar kind of questions, or the quality of the questions that Einstein asked at that point in time about quantum mechanics, relativity, and all of these kind of nice questions that he was bringing up. I think if we now make the link to what we have discussed before, there is probably another set of beautiful questions around around information and how all of these sort of spooky things actually really work. And we should actually be brave enough to ask these questions, and have scientists sort of jumping on that case and investigating these kind of questions, so that we will probably get to a next kind of, however you want to say it, sort of an evolutionary step, which sort of leaps us into the next kind of textbook content, so that we get even a further, more comprehensive understanding on how reality works compared to what we have in the mainstream textbooks these days.
Yeah, and what we have in the textbooks these days is wrong, in the sense that it's not complete. I mean, the first person to make fun of Einstein, as far as I know, was Einstein.
Yes.
And within a couple of years of publishing General Relativity, he was writing to his friends and saying, something's wrong here. It's not right. And he lamented later in his life that although he understood it wasn't right, he too was resistant to certain ideas like spooky action at a distance, even though he started the thing.
Yes.
And if you followed his stuff, he couldn't take the implications of his own stuff. And he said, but when he was younger, he couldn't question relativity because everybody had already converted. And so he became a prisoner of his own mental construct.
Yes, and I think these mental constructs that you're referring to are probably a result of our own conditioning, or of Einstein's conditioning at that point in time, right? I mean, he might have picked those things up from other sort of scholars, from his parents, from
I mean, but you can't have a scientific community where everybody's running around going, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. Then you wouldn't have a community. You just have a bunch of people going, that's not right. And so from a biographical point of view, a practicing scientist can decide to be safe, which is where most have to go, or everything collapses. And so I go about doing everyday kind of, and I know the little problems, and I work on my own little world and my own little system and I don't want to think about the big picture, because I'm working with these test tubes, and I'm working with these rats, and I'm working with these chemicals, and I'm working with these things, and I'm refining. And that's how most working scientists go through the day. If you find something that doesn't make sense, the tendency is to stick it on the side. And, we call that a scientific anomaly. And so we say, well, that doesn't make sense, but we'll stick it over in the drawer. And we'll stick it in our anomalies drawer. But let's focus on the stuff that we think we understand. And let's go, kind of a half full thing. I'm going to go with the full, and I'm going to hide the parts that we don't really understand, or not think about it. So when we say something like energy, healing doesn't diminish with distance, you don't want to think about that.
Yes.
Because then everything collapses.
So what people basically do, or scientists basically do, when I understand you correctly, they play it safe, because they basically, I mean, they run their careers, right? And they compete for money, scientific research money, and all these kind of things. So there is a reasonably safe bet for them to focus on things which are, referring back to the textbook that we have been talking about before, if they focus on investigating and researching in areas which are in line with a given textbook as it is currently published, basically.
Right.
And at the same point in time, you say there is this drawer of anomalies, and there is stuff in there, and it's probably piling up. I could imagine, right? It's
piling up.
It's piling up, but that gets ignored because some scientists actually want to play it safe, and they know that this is probably a bit of a shaky and risky area if they would open up the drawer of the anomalies and would pick out some of the stuff and research in these areas.
If you're going to be a university researcher, and you got to move up through the ranks, and you got to get tenure, and you got to publish, and if you're going to publish, the publications are going to be peer-reviewed. And peer-reviewed doesn't in any way indicate something's accurate. Peer-reviewed means you pass the test, which means you don't want to go too far.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want anything too crazy.
Yes.
You can find interesting data, but you don't want anything too crazy, because the edifice gets, you feel the question, the world isn't making sense.
Yes.
The way the textbooks say it's supposed to make sense.
Yes, and I think this is an important thing, because it doesn't make sense in relation to the given textbook, right?
Right.
So the phenomenon as such might certainly be there, but we cannot explain it considering what we consider as normal or explainable with our given textbooks. But we have just said that probably the textbooks sometimes need to be rewritten or at least enhanced.
Yep.
So one of the ways to look at this would be that those things which you currently hide in the anomalies drawer, so you pull them out, and these phenomena there are probably not normal in front of the frame of reference of the given textbook. But if we would change the textbook, if we would change the frame of reference and come up with another theoretical model or an enhanced theoretical model of how our reality really works, then what, if I understand you correctly, what you say is some of those anomalies might be pretty normal if the textbook would change.
If the textbook would change. But the rewriter of the textbook, they don't come along very often.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, take history of physics. Newton, who's generally considered the greatest scientist who ever lived. He was also crazy. I mean, he was crazy. And he was into all sorts of nutty stuff.
Mm.
But his basic fundamentals, that's okay, that was safe. And everybody bows to the... But Newton was into crazy stuff that didn't make any sense because he saw that the world didn't make sense the way he understood it, and he revolutionized it. And Newton's safe part became dominant for 300 years until Einstein came along.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't make Newton wrong, because we can still, travel to the moon using nothing but Newton.
Yes. I don't know whether a lot of people are actually aware about what you say is. I think Newton was also an alchemist kind of person, right?
He was a magician.
Yeah, he was a magician. So he has sort of played around or investigated areas which are far out of the scope for which he is currently renowned, right?
Albert Einstein wrote the introduction to Upton Sinclair's book, Mental Radio. Mm-hmm. And Einstein was a fan of looking into telepathy and all that other kind of crazy stuff. Yeah. And he said, wow, this is interesting stuff. And Einstein wasn't afraid. And so he could look at that and say, well, this is worth investigating. And you go to the founders of the American, the parapsychological associations back in the end of the 19th century. The American Society for Psychical Research, I think, began in 1883, within a year or so, and the British Society for Psychical Research started in 1882. But the founders of this crazy stuff, when they're looking into telepathy and clairvoyance and transmission at a distance and mind over matter, and let's look into this and that, these were heavy-duty folks. These were, this is, William James, one of the founders. These weren't like misfits on the street. These were the Isaac Newtons of their day in various fields, and they came together and they said, let's look into this stuff. That took either courage or something. Yeah. But that stuff, the interesting social phenomenon is that those two become institutionalized. And if you look at, this is a bias, if you look at some folks out there in certain fields of, craziness, parapsychological stuff, they too have become conservative, and they become believers in their own textbook. Mm-hmm. And they too, you latch on, and there's this urge for safety. I want safety in a textbook. I want safety in an idea. I want safety in a metaphysic. I want safety. And even the ones who go crazy, out to the extreme, unorthodox is the way I'm speaking. They take their unorthodox stuff, and then they start not to question that. And so the tendency, I think, is towards concretization of some ideas, and it's constant evolution of concretization of ideas, and we seek the safety with the illusion that we really now understand something.
Yes.
And you got crazy people in starting the American Society for Psychical Research, but they become conservative. And you got crazy people who start revolutions in physics, but they become the orthodoxy. And they defend their textbooks the same way that the previous generation of textbooks, you know, and you get Max Planck's infamous dictum that science progresses one funeral at a time. that you grow up assuming the crazy stuff is real.
Yes.
But you too will latch on to the crazy stuff. So in my healing research, what I constantly try to do is say, you know, let's assume you're wrong about everything and relax and don't defend. And let's just keep poking and see how many places we go. Yes. And no matter how much I poke, I keep finding doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense. Doesn't mean the stuff doesn't happen. It means I can't make sense of it.
Yes, and the fact that it doesn't make sense, it simply makes no sense given the existing frame of reference.
Yes.
Right? So if we would change the frame of reference, the textbook, our underlying model of how reality really works, all of a sudden those things might make sense,
Then they make sense. But right now, I don't know how to think about it.
Yes, because I don't have this other frame of reference. So yeah. I mean, I'm sometimes talking about, I'm calling this worldview, right? I mean, I'm talking about these textbooks or these existing kind of frame of references or frames of reference. I call them worldviews. So our understanding on how the world works, our theoretical model, our implicit kind of belief system about how the world works. So if we talk about those old-fashioned textbooks, which probably need a bit of a rewriting. So you have this old worldview, and if we could introduce a new way of thinking, a different kind of a worldview, so that we could at least debate which of those two theoretical models are probably more valid. I mean, you have this old established worldview, and then you have got a new worldview, a new model, and then let's have an open discussion about which of those models, given all of those phenomena that we see, which of those two models works better. And
they're probably both wrong.
and probably they're both wrong, absolutely. Yeah. Right?
But again, if you don't delve into it, you're safer.
Yes.
And so I recount an anecdote of a friend of mine who's a biologist at Columbia University in New York City. And she was telling me she's studying a particular thing, and she starts with wide-eyed innocence and excitement. She goes, you know, she studies insects and this, that, and the other thing. And she goes, you know, a moth can detect a single molecule from a mile away. Mm-hmm. And she's going, wow. I mean, you talk about the exquisite sensitivity of nature, and a moth can detect a single molecule a mile away. And I just sit there and listen to her getting all excited. And then I just said, because I'm annoying, how does the molecule hit the one moth? And she never thought of the question. Yes. And I said, what would happen if there's two moths?
Which moth does the molecule actually hit, right? This is the question.
And she said, well, you know, they would both detect it.
Yes.
And I said, how do you get that from a single molecule?
Yes.
And she just looked and her jaw opened and she goes, I don't know. I never thought of that. And I said, what if you consider scent as a wave propagation rather than lock and key that this molecule fits into that receptor?
Yes.
And she said, I never thought of that, but that makes sense.
Yes.
Now she's been doing this her whole life.
Yes.
But you have an idiot on the outside, me, who looks at this and just says, that doesn't make sense. Here's why. Now, if I come along and I say, it makes much more sense as wave propagation, she's startled conceptually, but that doesn't tell you how it really works.
No. But
it just says it's a different way of getting there. Yeah. And she was comfortable with the lock and key because it's in the textbooks.
Yes.
But if it's in the textbooks, come on, I studied it, I passed it, I got my Ph.D., I did all those kinds of things. I know what I'm talking about, I'm smart, and I can work out all sorts of problems by lock and key. But it doesn't make any sense with a minute and a half thinking about it.
Yes. And I think this is a fascinating area, because if we would allow ourselves to think out of the box, and if the scientific community would allow themselves to probably be a bit more brave and not just play safe, and I think there is a whole new kind of universe of questions to be explored and to basically find answers to as a response to these questions, which then would probably have or would carry the opportunity to rewrite the textbooks, right, and to change the worldview. I mean, honestly, there are. I mean, this is probably a very kind of often used example, but there were times when humanity thought that the Earth was flat, right? I mean, and now we know better. So
I think there's a flat Earth society in England still.
Oh yes.
I don't think they have a big following, but
no, and probably they might sort of prove to be right at some point in time if their underlying model of reality is actually sound. And I think this is the whole point, right? It is about the soundness, how useful, how correct a model is given all of these empirical evidences that we have around. And I mean, if we look at the soundness of a model by ignoring certain aspects and just put them into this famous drawer of anomalies, I mean, then you ignore everything which is not normal according to the textbook, and hence you keep on confirming your textbooks. Your textbooks, right?
And you're safe.
Yes, and you're safe. You're absolutely safe. But
so what happens if a molecule is detected by 2 moths a mile away? I would rather focus on how the lock goes into the key. You know, I don't want to spend too much time thinking about that.
Yes.
And if you do, you're going to be ostracized by the academy. Yes. So if you come up with crazy stuff, you're in bad shape. The only really good society I know of that looks into this stuff, scientific society, is the Society for Scientific Exploration.
Yes.
And this is a worldwide group of people who look into the scientific anomalies, to the stuff you're not supposed to look at. Yeah. And they do it not by debating the possibility of it, they do it by a data-driven inquiry.
Yes.
And so this is a society that's pushing 40 years old, but it was started by some folks with a tremendous amount of courage. The founding president was the head of astrophysics at Stanford. The founding vice president was the head of applied physics and engineering at Princeton. And these are, you know, folks with big reputations worldwide in their field. And they found each other at a symposium, and they said, you know, we're not allowed to talk about this.
I think this is great stuff, because what you say is there is this Society of Scientific Exploration which has a dedication to look into the drawer of anomalies.
Yeah.
Sort of sort that out. And I think this would be a great topic for another conversation, which we should have. And I hope that I mean, I don't know how many minutes we have spent together, but I think it was a whole wealth of things that we have covered, and it helps to create the awareness about given textbooks, and that can actually prevent us making progress. And I think this Society of Scientific Exploration with the focus and with the guys who are actually there, I would love to have a separate conversation with you on that.
I could do that for days and days.
That's perfect. So Bill, I would suggest I'd like to thank you for our conversation today, and it feels like we will have a lot of other conversations going. And I'm really grateful that you spent the time with us. So let me thank you for today, and best of luck, and we will certainly speak again soon.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.